Okay, so June 7th, Alec is doing a financial review due to the civil suit. And there were allegations that Alec was trying to put money into Maggie's name to hide it. Now, in the late afternoon, and this is why this is all very important, around 4 p.m., Alec's father, Randolph, is hospitalized. So at this point, he was, not well. He had a lot of health issues. And when his dad was hospitalized, Alec continued to work on the financial review and not go to the hospital. So what does that tell me? Okay, so what that tells me is that this is more important to him than anything on the planet. Doesn't matter his dad's health, his family, what have you. This is where he's choosing to spend his time and attention. Okay. And at this point, he knows his finances are going to be uncovered. And we now know why he was so afraid of that, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. So then June 7th, 2021, in the evening is when Paul and Maggie were murdered. It was proven they were murdered between 8:45 and 8:50 p.m. So I think the events leading up to that are really, really important. Now, from June 7th, there were a couple of pieces of bombshell evidence that proved that Alec was lying the whole time, and he was indeed there. And I find it so poetic is that, for all Paul's, flaws and issues, he saved his own, he was the one who got justice for the family because he recorded 2 videos that were bombshell evidence. And one was he and his dad in the afternoon, they were trying to fix a tree that had fallen over, and it showed, a timestamp. It showed what Alec was wearing because Alec had tried to lie about what he was wearing. But the biggest bombshell evidence was 8:44 p.m. So this was minutes prior to Paul's death. He records a video of their dog Cash at the kennels, and you can hear Alec and Maggie in the background. And Alec had previously said that he was not there, that he went over to his mom's house to check on her. She had dementia. She had her own caretaker, and he tried to use that as essentially as an alibi. But Paul's videos made it really clear that his alibi was a lie. And in fact, there was a woman by the name of Michelle Smith. She was the caretaker for Alec. Michelle Smith bravely testified against Alec, saying that she saw him that night only for 20 minutes. She was fearful. She was terrified when she was testifying. And she said that Alec was acting fidgety and strange when he was there. He used her for an alibi and asked her to lie about the timeline, which she refused to do. And to that woman's credit, I will just say, it is so hard when you are a woman in the South, and especially a woman of color, okay, to be able to go and testify against this powerful man who, you are in fear of and in fear for your life, because if he killed his own son and wife, what's to stop him from harming her? So I give her a lot of credit. And she, that was a really important piece of testimony. So on August 11th, 2021, Alex was questioned more seriously. There was a video that, as I mentioned, there was a video that he claimed he was wearing something different. And so August 11th, 2021, they showed the interrogation, the more serious interrogation of Alec in the police station. And what I found so fascinating is that if you watch that snippet, his body language was just like Alec was trying to close in on himself. His arms were crossed, his legs were crossed, but his legs were crossed in such a way that his body language was telling me, he was really trying to freeze investigators out. He was trying to, do his good old boy routine and just get away with it. And nonverbal communication is that there's a statistic, it's something like 75% of our communication is nonverbal. That's not exact, but and why it's so important is that don't pay attention to what people say. Pay attention to what people do. And the reason why that's so compelling is because most people aren't adept enough to be able to hide that subconscious process because they're not aware of it. As a therapist, I've learned about the importance of body language, and it's not so much what we say, but what we do. So for those of you listening, that's one thing. If you're kind of wondering, with people, how do you know? Well, if what they're saying is incongruent from their behaviors, there's a gap. And the gap there could be many reasons, but usually it's because of manipulation or the person is not being truthful. So if you're interested in that, go back and watch because it was very interesting to me, Alec's body language. So then September 4th, 2021, Alec is shot in the head while changing a tire on the side of the road. So eventually it was found out that this was all a ruse. Nobody knows to this day. Obviously, Alex somehow did it to himself. He was bleeding and things like that. But this is where Cousin Eddie comes into the picture. And Cousin Eddie is very important because Cousin Eddie did a lot of really shady stuff for the Murdaughs. He gave several interviews and he was involved. He's currently facing charges because of what he was doing for Alec, which I'm going to now explain. So Curtis Eddie Smith, they called him like the fifth Murdaugh or the fourth Murdaugh or whatever, because I don't think they considered Alec's sister, like, I guess she didn't count because she was a woman. I don't know. But he worked for them for years, but insiders claim that he was Alec's drug dealer. He engaged in financial fraud by cashing millions of dollars of checks for Alec. Alec asked Eddie, so on this day, which was September 4th, 2021, Alec asked Eddie to kill him, citing things just got fucked up, end quote. So that's what Alec said to Curtis Eddie Smith. Eddie claims he would not do that, and he followed Alec out of an abundance of concern as Alec sped off. So Alec, I guess then they pulled over the side of the road. Alec approaches Eddie's car and Eddie fires a shot in the air to scare him. And he screamed at Alec. He said, "Why do you want me to kill you?" And Alec supposedly said, quote, "Because they're going to be able to prove that I was responsible for Maggie and Paul," end quote. Okay. So according to Curtis Eddie Smith, when he left, Alec was not bleeding. He was in one piece. There were no issues. So Alec clearly, went ahead with the ruse. In fact, there was a good citizen who called the police because she didn't want to stop because it looked like a setup. And first of all, kudos to that woman because you don't have to stop. Call 911 and let first responders, engage if you're concerned about, your own safety. Helping people is great, but you don't want to do something to harm yourself in the process. So I personally believe that Alec was going to ask Eddie to kill him, but then he was actually going to kill Eddie and claim it was self-defense and try to blame everything on Eddie. Or it really was, he's like, well, this is the end of my life. All this stuff is being found out. I need to this is the way for me to look like a hero, whatever. So I believe that, Curtis Eddie Smith is lucky to be alive, but also was going to be the scapegoat for Alec. And obviously that situation did not turn out as Alec had hoped. So then what is next is September 13th, 2021 was the misappropriation of funds investigation. And what's interesting about this is that it comes right before Alec had to appear in court. Okay. So if we look at everything up until this point, Alec's life is literally crumbling in front of his eyes. He has a son who he clearly feels like he can't control. His wife is either has found out or is going to find out about all the addiction and the financial fraud and his house of cards was crumbling at this point. So October 2021, he appears in court. His bond was denied. He went to jail. And finally, the systematic enabling ends. And this is how insane it is that he pleaded the fifth. Alec pleaded the fifth throughout the whole, his initially appearing in court, he pleaded the fifth, which is just so telling. But let's look at this. So from 2015, where the Murdaughs were, thought to be involved in the death, finally, this man is starting to be held accountable and not receiving special treatment. That is too long of time for this stuff to happen, but unfortunately, it happens all of the time. On July 14th, 2022, Alec was disbarred, which thank God. Also, there's a lot of overlap with, I feel like, the Tom Girardi of it all. So maybe, I can talk about that at some point too. So he was disbarred and he was finally charged for murder of his wife and his son. Bond again was denied. January 23rd, 2023, the murder trial begins and he stayed in jail that whole time. March 7th, 2023, deliberation took less than an hour and a guilty verdict was given. Now, this just recently happened. So I'm recording this. It's 9/25. On 9/21, Alec pled guilty to federal conspiracy, wire fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering. He did it quietly. A lot of people didn't see this. He admitted to creating a fake bank account in 2018 to funnel stolen personal injury settlements. All totaled, he stole $8.8 million from clients who were badly injured or the families of those who were killed on the job. So essentially that is similar to the Girardi situation. Is he misappropriated almost $10 million of funds that were supposed to go to, families and Gloria's kids. And he finally just pled guilty. Before it was, he was pleading the fifth. He wasn't admitting to anything. He still hasn't admitted to the murders of his wife and his son. But what he has admitted to, again, is federal conspiracy, wire fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering. I mean, the level of severity of this tells me that it had been going on for so long. And because when we treat people with privilege that don't deserve to have the benefit of the doubt or to have that trust or to have that privilege, this is when bad things happen. So what I want to do is share now is a couple of really important observations from part 1 and part 2, and then my overall clinical interpretations. So after the boat crash, Alex and his father, Randolph, go to the hospital to prevent the kids from talking. Okay, so season 1, there's just clearly observations of intimidation, witness intimidation, them going right to the hospital to try to make sure that they said Paul wasn't driving. He, it was just such a messy situation that Alec and his dad, they were just, trying to control the narrative, which is what they always try to do. Here's the thing. When you're a parent, kids need to be held accountable for stuff. And if they aren't, they will turn into monsters. Sincerely. You cannot go through life thinking that the rules don't apply to you without developing a sense of narcissism and entitlement. And, that turns dangerous. And so in my estimation, this was a family that had so much generational wealth and privilege and trauma and, domestic violence and addiction and all of this stuff that it was left unchecked for so many generations that I feel that the trauma it burst out from the line of the family, and it almost infected the other families. I know that might sound strange, but as a therapist, I just look at all of this unchecked behavior, and to me, that is not sustainable. So when you have a family system where there's a lot of this behavior that goes on, the family system will implode because it's not sustainable. And that's what we see with this family. The other couple of things from season 1 that was shocking is that no one called Mallory's parents. These poor people didn't even know that their child had died because these Murdaughs are trying to just cover up and play, like, shift blame and all that stuff. It was just so gross. It was so disgusting. The other reason why I feel, unfortunately, the people who died prior to this probably won't get a lot of justice is that the police procedure was not properly followed, and that was said, in the documentary, which I guess it was a documentary. I don't know what the title of it is called, but so no one collected the family's guns after the homicides. So the Maggie and Paul were killed with 2 different guns. Okay. And those guns were obviously owned by Alec Murdaugh. But you know what? They were just allowed to be taken off the property by Alec's older brother, Randy. They were allowed to take the boat from the crime scene and just do God knows what with it. So there was so much evidence that was lost because the Murdaughs were allowed to just do whatever the hell they wanted to escape accountability. And, you can't outrun it forever. So another interesting thing is that the year prior to Gloria Satterfield's death, I'm going to go back to her for a second, is she found Alec's opiates. So Alec had a very serious addiction. He was addicted to Oxycontin, which is an opiate, which is extraordinarily addictive. And it also is one of those things that you develop a huge tolerance to it. So you need more and more to continue to get the euphoric effect. And the year prior to her death, Gloria found his bags of opiates taped under beds because, that's what people do in active addiction. They hide their substances. They hide their alcohol. They hide it. Gloria told Paul. Paul became aware of the drug use and forced Alec to detox. A year later, she dies. And then so does Paul. So I find it interesting. I think that Gloria knew too much. I think she knew too many of the family's secrets. And I think she was seen as a lottery ticket. So people are going to find this hard to believe because, most people listening to this, when you're a good person and you have empathy, you couldn't ever imagine using a human in this way. But for Alec, people were just tools to get what he wanted when he wanted it. So I think that is incredibly suspicious. And I also think it's interesting that Paul, he forced his dad to detox, and I guess he really wanted his dad to continue to be sober. So that also begs the question, were substances more important to Alec than anything else? Was it, his ego? It was probably a multitude of things. Okay. A huge observation, and I'm going to give you the timestamp of it because if you're interested, I want you to go back and look to it, is that part one and part two had very different portrayals of Maggie. Part one, it was like, was Maggie complicit in a murder? Was she, part of the problem? And part two was she was beloved, she was caring, she was down to earth. So that confused me, and I'm not sure what to make of that. I mean, all humans, we all have, positive qualities and flaws, but it was just such a reverse course for a portrayal of Maggie. And I found that interesting, perhaps because she is now deceased. Nobody wants to talk badly about people who are no longer here. So I'm not sure if that's the reason, but that I found very interesting. But the specific thing that I'm talking about is season 2, episode 1. Go to minute 16 and 9 seconds. Police body cameras show Alec having a quote unquote breakdown, which to me, I can tell when you can scrunch your face and you can do a lot of things, but when you're really upset, there's certain things that, through your body language will tell me if it's a show or if it's real. And one of the main things that he did that was so fascinating is he's having this breakdown. He's crying. He's, doing that put on voice. And another officer walks up to him, and Alec's entire face changes. The crying stops, the breathing hard stops. He looks at the officer and he's like, "How you doing?" Just like that. 16 minutes and 9 seconds. Go look at that. Because to me, that is the most telling thing of all, is that it's just an act. He's just acting. And even, his face completely changes. And then when he realized it, he puts the mask back on. So the mask slipped down for a second. I got a peek behind it, and then he put it back up. And so that little tiny peek, for most people, they'll ignore it. They won't even notice it. But for me, it was one of the most profound pieces of information in the entire, both of these seasons. If your child had just died and your wife, and not only did Paul just die, and this is going to be a little graphic, but his head was blown off of his body. Okay. He was unrecognizable. And the reason why I say this is because we have to keep in mind that this man just essentially took his child's head off and can't even muster a tear. He can muster, the fake, you squish your face and you do all this, but this man is dead inside. He has severe psychopathology. I can absolutely, allegedly, my opinion is Alec Murdaugh has severe psychopathology. This man he's dead inside. He is broken. There's something very, very wrong about him. When Alec was also in the car talking to police officers, his face is squished in pain, but there's no tears coming out of his eyes. And the thing about, and here's why that's so important, because people who have psychopathology or really severe issues with empathy, is that they can know enough to fake a mask of what a grieving person looks like, but they can't do the most important thing of all, which is feel it and experience it, because they're not capable of that. And so I can tell that when he's in the car, there's no tears. There's no tears. It's just, I mean, your family have just been killed. And not to mention that the day of the murders or the day after, okay, it was either the day before or after the murders, is that Randolph died. So Alec essentially, in, a 48-hour period, he lost his father, his mother, or his wife, I'm sorry, and his son. And, you know, think about for a minute how a healthy individual might respond to that. And to not be able to shed one tear, it's just so interesting to me. A couple of the other things that I noticed is that when Alec was brought into court, his family, so the trial location was at Colleton County Courthouse. When he was brought into court, there was a painting of Alex's grandfather, Buster, hung on the wall of the courtroom. So the Murdaugh family prosecuted murder cases in that same courtroom for the last 100 years, and clerks had to remove the painting prior to the trial. And why that's so important is because that courthouse was a safe space for the Murdaugh generational trauma and the generation, all of it. It was like that was their house. And so now Alec, it's just very interesting that, Alec's walking in, his grandfather's on the wall, which I would imagine would make you feel like, wow, I got this, this is my house, And so it truly is miraculous that this man was held accountable, and that, unfortunately, so many people had to die for that to happen. But it was just such a fascinating little tidbit for me. Okay, so now, the other thing before I move on, when in season 2, when the judge looks at him and he reads the verdict, and the judge says to him, "I'm sure you loved your son very much." And Alec's face, he had zero reaction. That man is not capable of love. I tell you that. His eyes looked black. I looked into his soul, and I promise you it was darkness. It was nothing but darkness. He had zero reaction to the verdict, which fine, but having zero reaction to a judge trying to give him the benefit of the doubt while sentencing him and saying, "I'm sure you loved him," and Alec, it didn't matter at that point. It was almost like it was a moot point. It was almost like the judge said, "It's raining outside." That was how egregiously awful his lack of response was. The point is that everything Alex said was a lie. When he went on the stand, he made this bizarre comment about, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave." And the judge said, "Well, what does that mean?" And he said, "Well, once I told a lie, I had to keep lying." And I think that even that's a lie, because in my estimation, this was premeditated. So he's lying to save his own skin. He doesn't care about his son or his wife or the fact that his father just died or Mallory Beach or Stephen Smith. He doesn't care about any of it. Alec cares about Alec, and that is the only person Alec cares about. Let me be really clear about that. So even him saying, "Well, I had to lie, I lied and then I kept lying." No, you premeditated something. You carried it out poorly. You got caught, and now you have to face the fact that we have proof that you're lying. Okay. So before I end, I just want to go over some of the terms that were discussed, and then talk a little bit about family annihilators. So survivor's guilt was a term that was brought up, and I wanted to explain what that is. So survivor's guilt is a psychological state experienced by an individual who survived a traumatic event that caused harm to others, but left the individual in question unharmed or spared from death. And this is in addition to the emotional trauma and PTSD from witnessing the incident itself. Okay, so Anthony Cook, Miley Altman, Morgan Dowdy, and Connor Cook, their lives are irreparably changed and damaged. They talk about having symptoms of PTSD, which of course, The accident in and of itself, let me be clear, if Mallory had not have died, that would have been enough to cause a post-traumatic stress event, okay? There is a post-traumatic stress event that can happen right after the event, but there's also something called complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is where when you have a trauma that is left addressed, it will compound over time and become more complex and more complicated and more chronic. So these young people's lives are forever changed. Okay. The PTSD, the trauma, losing not just friends, family members to each other. They had grown up together since kindergarten. Anthony, wanted to marry Mallory, and so let me be clear about that. Okay. So in addition to the PTSD and trauma, there is the why was it her? And why wasn't me? And the one thing that's really hard about survivor's guilt, and I'm going to speak to this a little bit because as a 2-time cancer survivor, I've experienced this because I've lost friends and people in my community due to cancer. And it's hard to explain if you've never experienced it, but essentially it's just this guilt that comes over you because it's like you're trying to make sense of what's happening in this world and why am I still here and why are they not? It's just such a confusing time. It leads to a lot of questions. It raises, it just raises philosophical questions of, why do things happen to good people and all these things? So it's a really complex topic, and I just wanted to touch on it. If anyone listening to this is dealing with survivor's guilt, please know that you're not alone. And please know there is a way to move forward through that. And I just send you all the love and support in the world. Now, the juicy stuff that I really want to get to is the family annihilator. So this is a term coined in the 1980s by a forensic psychiatrist named Park Dietz. It's now termed familicide, but there are researchers in the UK who identified 4 types of people that typically are family annihilators. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit because Alec really, it makes sense when you hear it. So the first is there's self-righteousness, disappointed, anomic, and paranoid. So the self-righteous killer seeks to locate blame for his crimes upon the mother whom he holds responsible for the breakdown of the family. This may involve the killer phoning his partner before the murder to explain what he is about to do. For these men, their breadwinner status is central to their idea of the ideal family. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense when we look at Alec. 2, disappointed. This killer believes his family has let him down or has acted in ways to undermine or destroy his vision of an ideal family life. So for me, an example of this could be disappointment that the children are not following, traditional religious or cultural customs. There was a case of a murder where a father, he, I'm not going to talk about that because I don't have the deeds. But there was a father who ended up murdering his 2 daughters because he was upset that they were more Americanized than he would have liked. I think he was very conservative. He was Muslim, and his girls, he ended up killing them because he felt that they were too Americanized, and he was very disappointed in, not following the cultural family rules. So I think that's very interesting with Alec too. Now, the third one, anomic, which in these cases, the family has become firmly linked in the mind of the killer to the economy. The father sees the family as the result of his economic success, allowing him to display his achievements. However, if the father becomes an economic failure, he sees the family as no longer serving this function. So this goes back to my belief that all of these people in Alec's life, they were just pawns. They were means to what Alec wanted to do. And when it no longer served him, his economic livelihood was in the drain. He was being charged with crime. It just makes a lot of sense when you look at it from this perspective. The fourth one, which does not apply to Alec, but I'll share it anyway, is paranoid. So those who perceive an external threat to the family. So this is often social services or the legal system, which the father fears will side against him and take away the children. So the murder's motivated by a twisted desire to protect the family. That absolutely does not apply to Alec because he had no interest in protecting anybody but himself. And the last bit of information is, in all of these cases, masculinity and perceptions of power sets the background for the crimes. The family role of the father is central to their idea of masculinity, and the murders represent a last-ditch attempt to perform a masculine role. Okay, so that's a lot of information. Thank you all for sticking with me. I just want to say that, my heart goes out to, people who are struggling with addiction, domestic violence, really scary stuff going on in family dynamics that isn't talked about. So for those people, I just want to say and remind us that secrets keep us sick. And I want to encourage people to never allow themselves to become sick because they're keeping a family secret. And I know that can be really hard. But obviously, Alec is going to be in jail for the rest of his life. And, justice for Mallory, justice for Gloria, justice for Stephen Smith. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting people's names because it's so much, but justice for all of them, justice for Maggie, justice for Paul. I know Paul made his mistakes, but, I just can't imagine being able to harm anyone in that way, let alone your own child. So I just think that speaks to, Alec's sociopathy and psychopathology. So I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. I appreciate you all very much. And you know what? I decided to do a little something different with my outro. I wanted to just share a little bit of a sentiment in terms of taking care of ourselves and each other. So that's how I'm going to end the podcast from now on, is just to say, please take care of yourselves and each other, and let's be the light in the world that we want to see. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening and watching. Disclaimer: posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT Podcast and on its social media is provided for general information purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT Podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.